4 generations ago, the move Scald was introduced to the Pokemon universe. Sure, at first glance, it may fit in with other moves of similar power and secondary effect chances, but through generations, we've seen the rise of perhaps one of the most powerful and problematic moves ever created. So let's go over the history, issues, and remedies for this move that everyone loves to use but hates to play against. This is the problem with Scald. Pokemon battle definitely takes a lot of skill and knowledge to become competent in, but at their core, these games are made as a fun RPG journey where decisions on new Pokemon, moves, and other characteristics aren't always catered for competitive play. Usually this is fine. Broken Pokemon are often legendaries, seen as bosses. Broken moves are usually restricted to one or a few users, and these can easily be restricted in formats or banned to higher tiers in Smogon play. But in the case of a move like Scald, you don't have these luxuries, and it's a difficult thing to even regulate. It isn't a situation like Knockoff we covered in the first installment of this series, where an underpowered move was overbuffed. No, Scald was born this way, and no real changes to the move have been made to regulate its power. There was even a Scald 3 ladder in Generation 6 that I'll cover later, but for now, let's look into why this move is so problematic and the issues it causes. Scald is an 80 base power, 100% accurate water type attack that hits on the special side. This is pretty decent damage and a somewhat viable move competitively as is. Scald also has the ability to thaw you if frozen, which is very situational, but amazing utility to have on Pokemon who are the primary swap-ins to Ice-type moves. It will also thaw a frozen target similar to how Fire-type attacks do. You wouldn't use it over Surf for this, as it hits slightly harder and has the same accuracy in PP, but Scald also packs the amazing secondary effect of having a 30% chance to burn the target. Burn is a really useful status condition to inflict, as not only do burn Pokemon take residual chip damage at the end of each turn they're active, but they also have the power of their physical attacks halved. As you would expect, this entirely ruins, or at least severely cripples, most physical attacking Pokemon. Taking their damage output and just having it means even super effective hits will have the power of neutral ones. This brings us to the first problem. Scald being one of, if not the most viable and consistent option to inflict the burn status. Not on a fire move,
Nope.
but on a water move of all typings. Historically, inflicting a burn was really only caused by fire type moves. Will-O-Wisp has a status move whose sole purpose was to burn the target. Many fire type attacks will burn with a minuscule 10% chance as a nice potential side effect. The Generation 4 introduced Lava Plume has a 30% chance to burn, but also has been a pretty limited move distribution wise, only being available as a level up move. To counter this, you could easily swap into a fire type Pokemon against a Will-O-Wisp user, or use other status counterplay like Substitute. You wouldn't see Lava Plume often either, so risking a 10% burn chance swapping into a Flamethrower or Flare Blitz rarely resulted in your appropriate swap being punished with status. But Scald having a pretty reliable 30% chance to burn and 100% accuracy makes it such a great option to spam and fish for a burn. It really can just compress your move slots, since you essentially have a damaging move that will double as utility. You can open up a coverage option for Scald swap-ins, or even run other utility instead of a status inflicting move. The second problem to cover is the invalidation of other water moves. When you're team building, you want to use the best Pokemon available with the best moves. Well, it turns out water is a really great typing, especially defensively. And it also turns out there are a lot of bulky water types that exist. Like it's an actual archetype. You know if you play competitive. So Scald naturally becomes these mons' best friend. A decently strong stab attack, which has a great chance to shut down physical threats. You're putting yourself at a disadvantage not to have it on your set. These bulky water types aren't usually investing into their offensive stats, so the damage difference between Scald and Surf is negligible. The stronger Hydro Pump isn't really an option on these mons with its shaky accuracy and low PP, while a comparable option like Muddy Water isn't nearly as widespread, trades its power for accuracy, and while it does have a nice 30% chance to lower the target's accuracy, stat changes are easy to swap out of and remove. So if anything, you may see it occasionally in doubles since it does hit both opponents. Scald is essentially a move with no opportunity cost on these Pokemon. There's usually no reason to not click it, you aren't losing out on much, and at the very worst, get off a decently strong stab attack. Even grabbing a burn on special attacking Pokemon will earn chip damage that makes up for the slightly lower base power. This might be fine if it was a lower powered option, but it really is strong enough to run on offensive mons as well. Scald is a move you'll see run on defensive waters, offensive waters, and even sometimes on Pokemon with higher attack than special attack due to the burn chance being such amazing utility over using a move like Waterfall or Liquidation, which don't have as high as a payoff and can succumb to harmful contact effects. There's also a pretty good chance your own Scald swap in will be your bulky water, so if you have to absorb a burn, then your physical moves may just end up doing less damage than Scald hitting on the lower special side. It's gotten to the point in many generations where only certain special attackers wouldn't use Scald. This is purely because they need the extra damage to secure certain KOs or 2-shots. It just outclasses other moves in most scenarios. Being able to inflict status and make progress against water resist is just utility that other moves can't supply. This brings us to the third problem, lack of consistent counterplay. Scald is a move with very little counterplay. It forces specific styles of play. You have to play around the burn in most cases unless you have a dedicated status absorber or running a specific ability that counters Scald like Water Absorb or Storm Drain. Normally, your option to avoid the burn status would be Fire type Pokemon since they're immune to it, but swapping in your Fire type against a strong Water attack isn't a sound strategy. Well, Water has a few types that resist it. You have Grass, Water, and Dragon types. Unfortunately, these types are rarely paired with Fire, giving very limited good neutral Scald swap-ins with a burn immunity. If trying to swap in those resists, you better be ready for that Pokemon to take a burn. It means you can't even safely swap your Rillaboom, Dragonite, or Crawdaunt in against a passive Scald user, because if it hits that 30% burn, that really feels like a 50-50, then that mon is essentially useless, even becoming setup and recovery fodder. So what are you to do? Always pack a Pokemon with an ability that is immune to water? Always have a Blissey to swap in on Scalds? Sure, the Covert Cloak was introduced this generation, but are you going to run that on every physical attacker? Even if you do, the Scald user still has other options it can click, or even predict you having to swap because you don't want to risk a burn on the mon currently in. It just seems like the Scald user usually has the advantage. You're essentially building a portion of your team to deal with one move. This also can limit your counterplay against other Pokemon if you want to keep your Scald counter healthy. Even if bringing other mons that seem like counterplay, like Guts Pokemon, you're still taking extra damage you really don't want on your sweepers. This brings us to the fourth problem, the crazy widespread distribution. So Generation 5 rolls around, Scald is released, it's only a level up move on the Simipour line, but all these Pokemon gain access to it via TM55, and even wider distribution is given in Generation 6, and then even more Pokemon have access in Generation 7 and 8, and it gets to the point where if you're a water type, you have access to Scald, even if you have no business with it. Or Shifu. Scald has found its way into being a TM in every generation since its release. This video wouldn't exist if Scald was just a very powerful move given to a few Pokemon, similar to Lava Plume. It's why I'm not making a video on the problem with Steam Eruption, which is even arguably more balanced with a mischance and a third of the PP, making it a lot less safe and spammable. The large distribution means you will see this move a lot more often. Singles tiers will likely have a few viable users in each of them, and each regulation of VGC will share this characteristic. Pretty much, you're not going to be safe from Scald anywhere. And what does this do? It makes the already all-around great water type even better. Your stock immediately rises with access to this move, especially as a bulky water who has more opportunities to spam it. The difference between having and not having Scald is shown in Generation 9, where they have limited the distribution pretty well. A Pokemon like Toxapex, who has been a staple in OU, being S tier viability in Gen 7 and A tier in Generation 8, has fallen down to B rank in Gen 9 without access to Scald, and even out of the tier usage wise. Of course, this is one example, and it should be mentioned Pex received other nerfs like losing knockoff and recovers PP being reduced, but when you look at it now, what are you really scared of? Liquidation, Surf, coming off of those stats? You might fear Poison, but there are a lot more counterplay options for that, like 2 whole typings. Physical attackers can now come in without the huge sweat of being ruined by a Scald burn, and it opens up a lot for them. You also don't have the Pex versus Pex or Tentacruel matchups where you're racing to get the first Scald burn to gain the advantage of Burn Chip. This is where I will give credit to Gen 9 for limiting the stalling aspect of Scald and mirror matches. A lot less Pokemon have access this gen, even though it remains a TM. This mostly addresses one of my fixes we'll get to later, but it still remains to be seen if reducing Scald's distribution is a long-term plan, or if they will restore its overwhelming presence come the next competitive installment. So what makes this move so busted, while an eerily similar move in Scorching Sands is almost never seen competitively? Let's compare the two. Scorching Sands is a slightly weaker move with the same burn chance, strong against fire types, but on an arguably way better offensive typing. Well, it comes down to a bunch of small attributes you may not realize are so important when playing competitive matches. First is ground having a whole typing immune to it, along with multiple other common ground counterplay options like the ability Levitate or item Air Balloon. To gain a water immunity, you have to specifically run a Mon with an ability that does so, which really limits your options. There's flying types and levitate users all over the place, along with the ability to slap the air balloon on whoever you want. These also grant you immunities to the common Earthquake, Spikes, and Sticky Web, meaning you're gaining other positive aspects from it. Another big reason is how ground is primarily a physical typing when it comes to stat spreads, so most enjoy the powerful Earthquake. Look at the ground types who have access to Scorching Sands and their rolls. The only primarily special attacking ground types being Mega Camerupt, the Nidos, Sandy Shocks, and Palossand. The first 3 take advantage of Sheer Force Earth Power, which is just flat out better, while Sandy Shocks needs the extra power from Earth Power to secure KOs as it is its primary damage option and would rather not miss out on 2 shots to gain a burn chance. This really just leaves a Mon like Palossand, who sort of mirrors the bulky water archetype, but as a ghost ground. This Mon sure enough does take advantage of Scorching Sands as it is slow with reliable recovery and can spam this move for the burn chance without jeopardizing a sweep. The rest of the ground types really just aren't equipped to run this move. The power difference between it and Earth Power is a lot more sizable than that of Scald and Surf, which makes edge cases where the user has both to sway more in Earth Power's direction. Non-ground types who would want this as coverage are similar to non-water types with access to Scald. It looks like a good option you would consider running, but in reality, you just don't end up finding room on your set for these non-stab moves. Mega Diancie would rather run Earth Power for the damage. Fire types in most cases would rather click their Fire Stab that hits steals harder and would really only need it for coverage against rock types, and any mix attackers would rather just run Earthquake. The point here being, you can have a very similar move, but with very different circumstances that can make it completely broken. I mentioned a Scald-free ladder at the beginning of the video, so how did that do? Well, it wasn't a suspect test or anything of the sort, but rather just a trial run for Gen 6 UU, which had a lot of bulky waters who were difficult to deal with even before having the deadly Scald helping them out. They would now have to run Surf or Hydro Pump as stab options, limiting their utility greatly or forcing them to shift their sets to fill a different role. There were definitely mixed reactions, with both sides having some valid points, but the main ones being how this would let a lot less games come down to pure chance of gaining a Scald burn. This would definitely change the direction of a game one way or another. You burn their setup Mon, you may just win the game there because of the 30% chance. You miss out on 3 Scald burns in a row, Now they have multiple boosts and are ready to sweep your team when you could have potentially swapped into a check immediately. Some people compared it as no more broken than other moves like Knockoff and even the entry hazard Stealth Rock, which definitely has potential for a future video, while counter arguments reference how those moves are powerful, but are at least consistent with what they do 100% of the time, where Scald is more of a spray and pray and hope you get the burn tactic, or hope you don't get burned on the other side. Other people noted physical grass and dragon types got a lot better and more reliable, while burn absorbers are more effective since Scald isn't there to punish them. It didn't decide who was the better player, but rather if you could get lucky enough to beat your opponent's win condition before it could beat you. Overall, even though I didn't get the chance to participate back then, since I wasn't much into the competitive scene yet, I think it is cool to see this happen and read the different opinions on the matter. I'll leave the whole thread in the description if you want to check it out. So now that we've established why Scald is such a problematic move, how do we fix it going forward? Well, the recent distribution nerf is a start. A lot less Pokemon having access to the Berm Spam machine is great for competitive. I think keeping it more exclusive could definitely work instead of slapping it on virtually every water type. I do have some spicy suggestions though, I think might make the distribution problem less of a problem. First is lowering the base power. My initial thought has always been making Scald a 50 base power move, but with Scorching Sands being around now, I can't really see that happening. So I think having the base power lowered to 70 to match this is still plausible. It becomes weak enough to the point where non-bulky waters will consider Surf more if going for damage. It still can hit decently hard with Stab, but the power over time difference between it and other special water attacks will be a lot more noticeable this way. The next idea I have is lowering the burn chance. Again, hard to do with Scorching Sands now a thing, but a 20% chance to burn is definitely more balanced. It makes it so a water type attack isn't on par with Fire's best burn spreading attack that isn't a signature move or Inferno. 20% will still nab you burns here and there, but going from an almost 1 in 3 chance to a 1 in 5 is a really big jump that makes swapping in a lot easier. Your Lumberry mons have a lot less likely a chance of getting burned on swap-in and then again when trying to set up, and it won't reward lazy team building quite as often by having Scald Burn be the win condition. If we combine these, then we get a 70 base power special water move with a 20% burn chance. This is still an optimal move on bulky waters who will have the longevity to sit and spam this move, just the reward isn't quite as high now, so it will work out less often for them. Other small nerfs I think could be fitting are to actually make it neutral against fire type Pokemon. I know fire is one of the best defensive typings already, but maybe boiling water shouldn't be as effective against them. This does open a bunch of different arguments, like for it to be super effective against ice types, but I don't really want to do that to them, and I do like this for balancing the move. I think this and Steam Eruption should also be factored in with the ability Thick Fat. Thick Fat has the damage taken from fire and ice moves, and these moves seem like they're right in the middle thematically of this. It would slightly buff an ability that is already pretty good, but not an ability that is close to being broken, especially with its users. We've seen abilities affect particular moves before, like Oblivious blocking Captivate, so it could be done in theory. It also helps the Mamoswine line be neutral to it, which I'm always a fan of because I love that mon. It honestly wouldn't take too much to balance this move. You don't want to nerf it to the point where it's unusable, but if they want the distribution to be as enormous as before, then I think a couple of these changes could really do the trick of lowering its overwhelming utility and move slot compression while still being an attractive option on bulky waters. Let me know what you think should be done with Scald. Do you think it is actually busted or a fair and balanced move? Also, if you have any other problematic aspects of Pokemon for this series, leave a comment and let me know. It might just end up making it into a video. Shout out to my YouTube and Patreon supporters, including Goldbud Mr. Frank Beans, Bucket Boys, Divi, and Wario. If you like this video, check out the Thirst video in this series next. See you there, buds.